scientific evidence. And given that we have 10 years before the SDG timeline, and governments are considering various pathways to development of green economy in their countries to address the SDGs. So here we want to present key messages that have been generated through analysis of the evidence, that scientific evidence that we have gathered through the recent past. The first is that forests and trees are critical to poverty alleviation in Africa. Forests contribute 21% of household income in many parts of Africa, particularly those who live around the forest. These forests provide goods and services that support the well-being of the rural communities. And when they get into the market chain, they assist these households to build assets to move out of poverty. And in the times, incidences of shocks like climate change, global economic shocks, or seasonal shortfalls, these forest goods provide sources of goods and services that help them to manage risks across the seasons and the years. And given this value of this natural forest capital, it therefore merits greater weight in decision-making to formally recognize this contribution to poverty alleviation, and also greater resources to support this forest in order to sustain this value to the rural livelihoods. Second message is that forests and trees can contribute to the well-being of the poor as we face profound global changes. We are currently in a situation where we're having many challenges. Climate change is one of them. Global economic shocks are very much with us. Infectious diseases, we have the COVID pandemic with us at the moment. And these changes are affecting the poor most harshly, and particularly by reducing the opportunities, narrowing opportunities for livelihood development for these people. And in such instances, we have found evidence that it's the forests that provide a lifeline for these rural people to enable to sustain their well-being. Secondly, we also wish to state that it's therefore then important to policy approaches that are integrating across sectors that mitigates the risk for the poor while addressing other development challenges. And this would include issues of minimizing the inequities, the losses to the local community, by addressing the land rights issue that enable them to build resilience to their lives by opening up more opportunities. For example, through commodity value chain development, they're able to now have resilience to address those shortfalls when they experience these shocks. The third message is we also found that The third message is that the distribution of the benefits from these forests for human well-being is fairly inequitable. And there are various factors that are contributing to this inequity. One of them is gender, others are class, ethnicity, and political, as well as other social differences that are shaping the way these benefits are distributed. Oftentimes, you will find in exploitation of forest resources is the elite that are able to capture more of these benefits, and often at the cost of the local communities and the livelihood potential. And therefore, it becomes very important that policies are put in place that address these inequities by ensuring that we have property rights and land rights that are available for the poor to enable them to access the capital and technology that they would not have, that for which the elite community are able to capture and take advantage, and therefore improve their opportunity and probability of benefiting from the benefits that come from these forests and trees-based land systems. Next slide, please. Fourthly, we have cross-sectoral coordination in land use policies will be able to avoid excessive costs being borne by the poor. Current natural resource-based policies have been in place that support activities like ecotourism, they support ecotourism as well as community participatory management, whereas so that when we have these policies that are competing, the exploitation of the forest might be able to be better managed instead of having conflicting policies. And some policies we have found that they do add pressure on the smallholders. For example, when you have policies when you plant your trees on your farm, but when you need to harvest, you have to get permission or get a permit to be able to take advantage of the trees that you have planted. And this sometimes becomes a disincentive to tree planting. And it's important that policies are becoming sensitive to these issues that could be an incentive to tree planting. And to this end, then our study recommends that we have more transparent participatory approaches to land use planning, where we have wider engagement of community groups as well as all the sectoral representatives in order to open up issues that can be addressed on livelihoods that will improve the outcomes for the poor. Next slide, please. The final message is that we have also found evidence that policy measures do exist that enable forests and trees to effectively address poverty goals. However, there's no one size fits all. And we find that a number of measures are in place to support community forestry approaches, ecotourism, that are able to ensure that benefits already arrive at to support poverty alleviation issues. And a number of mix of measures are in place also that we have been able to find evidence that can minimize the cost to the poor and maximize the benefits to the same. So these measures include rights-based measures, regulatory measures, and issues of formalization of the informal operation is an important component to ensure that their contribution is formally recognized in national processes and national accounting systems so that they can be able to be acknowledged and be able to harness the benefits that come from a formal system of formal recognition of the same. We have found that a number of organizations that have been supported, such as producer organizations, have been very valuable in generating livelihood outcomes that are positive to the members of those organizations. Market access is an important factor in development, and it's important that government also ensure that these communities have access to market for their products so they can be able to gain benefits from what they are working on the product. And payment for ecosystem services have also been found to be extremely valuable. And this is a mix of measures that each government needs to decide very carefully which ones would work best for them. But most formally and most important is that the role of forests in poverty alleviation must be acknowledged at the government level, at the national level, for these measures to be able to be effective in contributing to poverty alleviation and to addressing the SDG goal number 1. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muta. And there's just a couple more slides, and I wanted to kind of zoom out and summarize. We're at a high-level political forum. Many of you in the audience will, we hope, be interested in these findings and seek to act on them. And so what are some of the key implications if we zoom out and summarize the report? First, recognizing just basic recognition of the importance of forests and trees to poverty alleviation. And the evidence that we've found suggests that forests and trees are indeed have a lot of potential in this regard. And therefore, it's necessary to prioritize policies to conserve as well as to sustainably manage these assets, the forest and tree-based systems. It's also important to support more secure property rights so that those who have the rights to land and the resources on them, forests, trees, are able to take advantage and use them to support their well-being. And this is especially true for forest-reliant people, women, and different kinds of vulnerable groups who should be prioritized in policymaking. Policies and programs should be tailored to the different contexts. That really emerged. And I started the presentation by talking about the tremendous diversity of forest ecosystems and tree-based systems, including agroforestry and others throughout the continent. And so this requires really tailoring policies and programs to those resource contexts and the political contexts, social contexts in which they are embedded. And doing so is very important to mitigate inequalities that were also a persistent theme through the research that we did to inform the policy brief. And then finally, as was mentioned, strengthening policy alignment in the land use and forest sectors is really important. We recognize that it can be very challenging to do, and it can entail trade-offs as well as synergies. But it's critical to try to move toward better policy alignment across these sectors to advance poverty alleviation and sustainability goals. So in conclusion, we find that forest and tree-based systems are vital to poverty alleviation that is just and that is sustainable over the long term. Perhaps there are ways to exploit natural resources such that poverty is alleviated in the short term, but then for the longer term, such as for this child, that he would not be able to benefit in the same way as his father from those resources. And yet, despite their potential, we find that forests and trees are often overlooked in policy. And we recognize some of the limitations that often ministries of agriculture might have might be separate from ministries that are of environment. And so sometimes forests and trees fall through the cracks. And so based on the evidence that we've compiled and the stakeholder process, we find that now is really the time to move beyond business as usual. The challenges that are many Africans and that indeed the world community are facing in terms of climate change, increasing the pandemic, as well as widening inequalities, really call for moving beyond business as usual, such that the foundational assets of forests and trees can take a more central role in advancing the goals that are set out by policymakers across the continent in Africa for poverty and sustainability. So thank you very much for your attention. We will have time for questions, and we indeed look forward to the discussion. And so I would invite you to type your questions as Dr. Wildeberger suggested, and we'll come back to them after we hear from two more of our authors on this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Miller and Dr. Mutter, for this excellent overview of the study findings. And we will continue now with the statements of our panelists, who will now explain the specific aspects of the linkages between forest and poverty in Africa based on the scientific evidence we have analyzed. If you have any questions, as was already mentioned, please put them into the Q&A box. We will address them after all presentations in the first panel discussion. Our first panelist is Gillian Kabwe. Dr. Kabwe is a senior lecturer at the Copperbelt University in Zambia, and she will explain to us the dynamics between forests, trees, and poverty in Africa. Please, Gillian, you have the floor.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this invitation to speak at this high-level meeting. I'll just start sharing my screen quickly for my short presentation. Just as a follow-up to what has already been presented by my two colleagues, Daniel and Doris, I would like to just highlight how we had organized our thoughts in preparing this report. Initially, we had to look at conceptualizing poverty dynamics so that we could look at the benefits that accrue to the users from that perspective. So we had looked at 4 aspects, which is the movement out of poverty as one of the first poverty dynamics aspects, which focuses on poverty alleviation, or the durable improvements in well-being. That is looking at how forests can actually help to move people out of poverty. Those that are poor, does it move them into extreme statuses or the other way around? And the second aspect is the supporting of the current consumption. As we are aware, there are certain households that actually use forest and tree products to support them to maintain their status quo, so that if they didn't have access to these forest resources, then perhaps they would not remain in the status group that they are currently. But we also see that forests and trees help to mitigate risks. There are many people that depend on forests for them to be able to avoid these risks that have come about, especially as a result of this climate variability that we have been experiencing lately, which also affect the kind of resources that can be obtained from the forests and for people to benefit on in the daily usage. But needless to mention also the fact that forests can also have these negative effects on well-being. There's evidence that we have provided within our text to show how some of these people that depend on forests can actually be affected negatively. So these are the 4 areas that we would like to focus our poverty dynamics discussions around. And what you see in the graphical presentation here is simply to elaborate on these 4 aspects. If, for example, if people are remaining in the same group where they will just be maintaining the same status quo, it means that they will just be moving along the same axis throughout. Whereas if people are moving from level A to level A2, then we'll know that there's a shift for some of them into a better group if they had access to good forest resources and tree resources. What is it that we would like to emphasize that may hinder maximization of the usage of these forest resources, even for policymakers to not be able to utilize information that in their decision making, for them to effectively appreciate the forest resources per se. What we have highlighted, I think, more importantly, is that the national statistics offices, which will be collecting information. For example, if you look at the agricultural sector, every year they have this forest crop forecasts, which give them adequate information for them to use as a basis for making decisions. But when you look for information that can assist decision makers to emphasize the role of forests in lifting people out of poverty, you find that there are very few studies that they can use to make decisions in that regard. So that information really needs, maybe what we could be championing, and especially the decision makers, is that we also engage national statistics offices to be able to collect this particular information for us to use in decision making. We also note in this report that there are barriers to entry in timber production. As we are aware, most of our indigenous forests actually it's the timber that has more value, but you find that access to the timber in those natural forests is limited to people that have got concessions. So it's important that we try and find ways and means of ensuring that timber production is also accessible to these groups of people that we consider to be experiencing poverty. We are also aware that, as Doris already explained, that these non-timber forest products actually have a potential for them to increase people's well-being. But then there are also limitations in terms of markets, which need to be addressed. The last aspect that we emphasize also is in the existing forest policy levers, which Doris mentioned, which are available for people for us to use to be able to alleviate poverty. But most of our governments do not even invest much in forest resources. If you look across most of the data that we have, even here in Zambia, if I give my country as an example, we find that the forest sector is one of the least that is funded. We also acknowledge that there is a lot of support from the international community in this aspect. But then the proportion of these resources that come to most of the African countries cannot even be compared to other regions. For example, we find that that international funds are not even able to fill up the gaps that our national budgets may not necessarily cover. So importantly, I think there's need to for people to be trained in resource mobilization, whether be it locally or internationally, because there are baskets of funds out there that can support forestry development. But as long as we do not have a resource that can tap into those resources, then will always remain underutilizable, and then this will also affect management of our forest and tree-based systems. But this is key, to have people that can actually resource mobilize so that we can have a team of capacity developed personnel. I end my presentation there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gillian, for this comprehensive overview of the dynamics between forest, trees, and poverty in Africa. Our second panelist is Laura Wang Rasmussen. Dr. Rasmussen is an assistant professor at the University of Copenhagen. And she will explain to us the contextual factors that shape the poverty dynamics in Africa. Please, Laura, you have the floor.
Yes, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so what became clear to us by preparing this policy brief and also the global assessment report was that when you look at the forest poverty dynamics or linkages, then you must really also attend to a number of contextual factors that shape these forest and poverty dynamics. And I'm going to now give you a few examples of these contextual factors. And we categorize these into 4 different categories. The first category is the social context. And one example here of a key social factor, that's the last youth population in many African countries. So more than 60% of the population in Africa is actually under the age of 25. And this very large and rapidly growing population of young people, that presents both opportunities, but it also presents challenges. So on one hand, then the large youth population actually fosters creativity and innovation, which could mean more just and equitable and sustainable societies across Africa. But then on the other hand, then there's also a declining interest among young people in forest management, and also the whole appreciation for the role of forest and trees that they can play in poverty alleviation. Then the second broad category of contextual factors shaping forest poverty dynamics, that's the economic context. And one example here is mega infrastructure projects such as the Lamu transport corridor that goes all the way through Kenya. And this mega infrastructure project aims to increase national and international connectivity and secure access to energy and natural resources. But it does also have major consequences for both the forest landscapes and then especially the people living in these forest landscapes. Then the third broad category is the political and the policy context. And one example here is that how forests actually contribute to poverty reduction or poverty alleviation, that can be strongly influenced by whether the forest area is organized as community forestry. So in the scientific literature, then we see many examples of how community forestry can reduce poverty. But we did also come across a few studies from Kenya and Ghana, where some areas with community forestry have actually experienced increases in inequality because forest access has been restricted for the most marginalized and poorest community members. Then the fourth and final broad category is the environmental context. And I should mention that this category actually differs substantially from the other 3 categories: the social context, the economic context, and the political context. And that is basically because, one, then many environmental factors are time invariant. And then 2, then if we look at the case of climate change, then the effects on forest poverty dynamics, those are characterized by very long time lags. And then the third reason is that environmental factors such as climatic stressors, those are actually very difficult to change through forest or poverty interventions or policy instruments. So these should rather be seen as constraints or boundaries to the forest and livelihood strategies and activities. Then I would like to end by saying that these social, economic, political, and environmental factors can exert influences both at the very local scale, the national scale, and international scales. But when we in the past have looked at the role that forests play in supporting local communities, then I must say that we have used a lens that was way too narrow. So in other words, then to really understand the types of actions and policies needed to safeguard forests and communities, these communities that really depend on the forest, then we also need to devote attention to mega trends that operate at regional and intercontinental and global scales, but that actually shape the forest and livelihoods at the very local level. And through this work, then we identified 5 of such mega trends. And these are the growing commodity markets, the climate change, technological change, then global social political movements, and finally the spread of infectious diseases. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura. I think this was a lot of food for thought, and I see already that people have posted many questions, and I'll try now to, my colleagues and I will try now to compile these questions and ask our speakers to respond. And the first question I will address to Dan Miller. And the question is, how could PES schemes be funded and be viable alternatives in Africa? Should they allow payments directly to the poor?
Thank you, Christoph. And I've been also monitoring the question. There's some really great questions in here, and I hope we have a chance to get to them. On payments for ecosystem services, I think absolutely we see REDD+, so reduce emissions from forest degradation. There's a lot of Ds, deforestation and degradation. Obviously being a very prominent type of payment for ecosystem service scheme, that's particularly relevant where there are large expanses of forests that can sequester carbon at a large scale. So, obviously that's a possibility, but it seems that the question is about, within Africa, many of those schemes are more global in nature, with the funds coming from wealthier donor countries. Within Africa, I think the short answer to the question would be yes, direct. There seems to be evidence, not just from Africa, but elsewhere, that payments to individual land owners is an effective way to, I think we found some evidence that can be used to certainly support well-being, whether it's a pathway out of poverty. I think the evidence is more mixed on that. And I think some of the colleagues that were working specifically on this might also chime in on this if they would like to. But I think the trick there would be how to identify the relevant landowners. And as we know, land tenure and property rights are often overlapping in terms of customary rights, traditional rights, individual rights, and government claimed rights. And so figuring out who should get the payments is a tricky question. But generally we see evidence that payments to individual landowners can be effective. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to further answer that question.
Thank you, Dan. Is there anybody of the panel who wants to add on? I mean, we do have a lot of other questions too to address. If not, then I would maybe, Doris, please, sorry.
Yeah, mine would just be supporting what Dan has already said, that PS is an effective way and to ensure that benefits actually go back to where the work is happening. However, as has been said, it has not been happening to the local community because of the complexities of accessing the individuals and also in identifying the same. And this is one of the challenges that governments need to address to ensure that when they do get into these agreements or these arrangements, that they integrate the local community in the discussions on sharing of those benefits, because that is the big challenge, that the sharing of benefits is not equitable. And you find that the local people are the ones who are bearing most of the cost, while the benefits are going elsewhere. They may be going to those who are able to capture, and maybe as well as to the government. So it's an issue of inequity of how to address the benefit sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris. But may I continue with another question, and may I ask you to stay on. There is a question: what are the key barriers that decision makers should or could address to fully unleash the potential of forests to alleviate poverty? What is your opinion on that? What are the key barriers?
Thank you. Thank you for that very important question. That the forest potential is very much established. Science have proved that forests have great potential in supporting national economies, contribute to the same, and also to the livelihoods as we have demonstrated. And one of the biggest challenges that, or the barrier to why it's not happening, is because the national statistics, the national accounting systems are not yet acknowledging or capturing this value. The value of the contribution to the economy is very much limited to the formal processes. What the government authorities do capture and report is what is included. However, a number of forest activities are in the informal sector, like many of the NTP's value chains are in the informal sector. So they are not captured. What happens, how they benefit or what they don't benefit from is not captured. And that is one of the challenges that needs to be addressed, that a formalization of these informal operations will be useful in ensuring that the benefits are captured formally and the operations are also supported formally, because what they contribute is what would be allocated back to them. So it's important to address. And also the issues of land tenure is an important activity that needs to be addressed, because many of the local communities do not have rightful tenure to where they collect their resources for their livelihoods and also for the businesses. So you find that they are at a disadvantage, because when they go to access, they have challenges to access those resources, and it becomes a constraint. So tenure is an important issue, land rights, as well as property rights. When the products get to the market, you find that the benefits only go to those who are able to capture, like upstream at the market level, but at the production level and to some extent transportation level is not very much appreciated in terms of benefits. So the benefits are very much inequity. So need to support those value chains properly in an informal way, formal way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris. I do have another question I would like to direct to Gillian. And the question is, what is your recommendation on forest enterprise development? And what can the international community do to assist in increasing the value of African forest products?
Thank you very much, Christoph, and also for the question that has been posed. The enterprises, forest-based enterprises, Doris has tried to elaborate on these forest enterprises and how they have not been fully developed. I know that there has been a push from many angles. For example, I do recall that FAO had tried at some point to try and document these forest-based enterprises who's benefiting. Some of them are actually leading to this unsustainable exploitation of the resource itself, leads to deforestation or forest degradation. So in order for these enterprises to be formalized, I think, and also the reduction in improvement of roads, reduction of taxes, if they are formalized, because I think many people try to dodge taxes in most of our African countries because of the high interest, very high interest rates. People are unable to obtain loans. And as you know, most of our forests are also dry forests. So certain periods of the year, They will not even have resources that they can use to sustain their businesses. So I think looking at these forest-based enterprises, there's a lot that needs to be done, but more importantly, it's to identify which ones can go along with community forestry. Because like now, community forestry is being championed, but what would be the basis to incentivize people to get involved in community forestry if it's not these forest-based enterprises, which people can then see that there are these benefits that will accrue to them as a result of them being involved in these forest-based enterprises. I think that's how I would sum it up. I know it's a difficult thing because many people have not yet seen what can come out of it and how they can obtain resources from far off distances. The technologies in the cities, the resources are far in the forests that are far from where people are living. And how do we bridge these things? The market is also elsewhere internationally. How can we link communities to those international markets where they can obtain something that will enable them to see the profitability of the industries? I think it's in all this value chain that we can see enticement of people getting interest in engaging in forest-based enterprises. That's how I'd summarize it.
Yes, thank you, Rich, Gillian. I can take two more questions now. I have to choose. There is one question I would like to direct to Laura. Is there an example, or could you please share an example that includes a holistic approach of forest poverty alleviation that takes into account all four contexts, all four categories of contexts that you have been explaining?
Yeah, so what I should say here is that what became also obvious for us during our review of the scientific literature was that these factors are actually often analyzed in individually. But the point that we would like to make is that these factors are not independent from each other at all. In fact, then they often co-occur both in time and space, and they interact in a multitude of different ways. So I don't recall us coming across any example in the literature where all these factors were actually accounted for at the same time, but this is what we point to also as a substantial gap in the literature, that there's not so much knowledge actually on the effect of all these factors at the same time.
Thank you very much, Laura, for this straight answer. I want to pose just one more question because it's a very fundamental, and I'll invite all the panelists, whoever wants to take this question, but please, I would ask you for a brief answer. Could you tell us more about multidimensional well-being and the variables taken into consideration, the limitations of the analysis and the statistical approach used for the estimations? I think it's a very fundamental question for our discussion today. So maybe Dan wants to start with that.
Sure, I could start. Yeah, we find that there's a lot more evidence on the economic contributions, the economic dimensions of poverty. And so we wound up, using kind of in more comparative cross-country analysis, we used, how much per day income measures or consumption measures. But there is also a lot of literature looking at other dimensions, including the spiritual or religious value that forests can have. In the pandemic, a lot of people, particularly in cities, have discovered how being able to be out and be among trees can be refreshing. Can also, shade is obviously critical. Those things are not necessarily going to lift people out of poverty, but they very much support human well-being, which is an important part of that broader process. I would say, and there's many, many more dimensions to mention, but I would say one really critical aspect of this is, the evidence is I would say at a still relatively early stage in terms of being systematic and in terms of being collected over time. So to get at dynamics. So Jillian's presentation, I think, was very important, and something that emerged from our work was just how relatively little we know kind of over the long term or over time about how people's reliance on and use of forest resources changes and how that changes their well-being. And given the policy audience here, I would say that, really working closely with national statistical offices who are often outside of, forest or environment or agricultural departments can be really important to more centrally integrate questions and information collection about the role of forests and also trees outside forests, agroforestry systems, et cetera, which are overlooked. So that's a kind of broad answer to that very important question.
Thank you very much, Dan. And I suggest that we now continue with our next panel. Thank you very much for your excellent questions, and thank you very much to the speakers for the excellent responses. We will continue with question and answers after our next panel. And our second panel will start with statements of our local experts. 9 scientists from different parts of Africa have consulted 207 stakeholders across Africa, mostly virtually, of course, due to the COVID pandemic, and collected their views on the outcomes of our scientific analysis. The stakeholders were selected to represent different relevant groups, including national policymakers, civil society, academia and research, the private sector, international development organizations, and other interest groups. These comments of the stakeholders have then informed the development of the final version of the publication as you see it now. The comments were addressed within each section of the policy brief. And I would like now to invite as a first speaker, Dr. Abby Chagala, the Assistant Director of the Kenya Forestry Research Institute, who will share with us stakeholder views from East Africa. Abby, you have the floor, please. I hope Abby is there.
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Good evening or afternoon or morning. Thank you very much, Chair, for this opportunity. Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. What's wrong with this? Okay, it's a problem. Sorry, there's a problem here. Just give me a minute.
No problem. I can also continue with another statement and give you more time if you need, Abby.
Yeah, there's a problem with them. Don't know why I'm not getting my presentation. Okay. Sorry, Chair, I'm on now.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I managed to get it. My name, as the Chair said, is Abby Chagala from Kenya, and I wish to share experiences on conducting stakeholder consultation in East Africa, particularly in Kenya. I will start with the consultation process. In East Africa, the consultations were held in 3 countries, namely Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania, and the process was generally the same. In Kenya, the consultation commenced with identification of key stakeholders from different relevant groups. Each stakeholder was contacted through telephone and email. The purpose of the consultation explained, and each requested to confirm their participation. The list of stakeholders who accepted to participate was then submitted to UFRO for approval as required. The draft expanded policy brief on forest, trees, and poverty alleviation in Africa was shared with the approved stakeholders, and online Zoom consultations arranged.
The consultation focused along the guiding questions provided by the Global Forest Expert Panel and against the backdrop of the existing forest management in Kenya and knowledge of other African countries. A total of 28 stakeholders participated in the consultation in Kenya, 22 in Ethiopia, and 20 in Tanzania. And this included policymakers, civil society, researchers, academia, private sector, local and international NGOs, community-based organizations, and farmers from across the country to ensure that all views were captured. Inputs during the consultation were summarized into a report, which was submitted to UFRO. Chair, during the process of consultation, all stakeholders were committed to contributing to the policy brief and wish to be involved in such future processes. Some of the challenges faced during the consultation were that face-to-face consultations could not be held as there was a lockdown in the country due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some selected stakeholders required formal invitation and clearance, which was not possible. And some stakeholders had poor internet connectivity, while a few were unable to attend the consultations or provide their input due to personal challenges. I now wish to summarize the key issues raised by the stakeholders during the consultation. First, there was no doubt that all types of forests in Africa, including those in dry zones, the mangroves, rainforests, miombos, savanna, and plantations, contribute greatly to poverty alleviation through provision of goods and services, and each deserve recognition. It was, however, noted that ownership of these forests is key as it influences sustainability. In addition, mountainous and hill forests and the littoral vegetation ensure and are critical for sustainability and availability of water resources and downstream land use activities locally and as far as Egypt in many sectors, including agriculture and fisheries. The expanding area of agroforestry, farm forestry, trees in urban centers, and private institutions have great potential for achieving the desired 10% tree cover in many parts of Africa and in reducing overdependence on natural forests. Number two, it was noted that despite their importance in poverty alleviation, forests and trees are not considered as crops and are therefore not managed under a clear value chain approach, ranging from tree seed, management, development, processing and value addition, marketing and consumption. This has affected the appreciation of forests and trees in poverty alleviation. Furthermore, benefit sharing with local communities along the value chains and infrastructure development for access to markets has not been clearly defined, although they are key to poverty alleviation. In addition, a strong call was made for formation of associations and cooperatives, which are essential to support farmers in production and pricing of tree and forest products with enhanced benefit flow to communities, hence lifting them from poverty. Number three, of great concern was the weakening systems of research, training, outreach, knowledge management, and the declining enrollment in forestry, as well as law funding. A focus in these areas will enhance the state of the art and capacity for value chain development. This will also provide opportunities for incorporating indigenous knowledge, development and sharing of cutting-edge technologies, and protection of intellectual property rights in these systems to the benefit of local communities. Enhanced access to information will empower local communities and the civil society to support sustainable forest management, lobby for their rights, and gain positive political goodwill and support to forestry development. This strategy will also fast-track the development of the Forest Policy and Forest Act and create an enabling environment for forestry development. It was further noted that over 2 decades, from the Jakarta Declaration made during the 8th World Forestry Conference in 1977, which was a landmark that turned forest management to support food security with implications on poverty eradication, few, if any, African countries' forest policies have captured this shift. Revision of forest policies remain in draft forms and are yet to receive approval by Parliament. Chair, the importance of gaining positive political goodwill and support remains paramount in enhancing the recognition and the contribution of forests and trees to poverty alleviation. The stakeholders were confident that a focus on these observations will provide a sound base for developing and implementing inclusive policies and supporting instruments that guide effective contribution of forests and trees to poverty alleviation and sustainable management. Chair, as I finish, we found the consultations beneficial in development of the policy brief, as a wide range of stakeholders across the country participated in the consultation. The process which was used during the consultation of identifying experts in selected countries to coordinate the consultation and involvement of key stakeholders may be considered in future in developing similar policy tools. While conducting such consultations, foresters emeritus should be included, as they have a wealth of knowledge and experience which should be tapped. Thank you once again for this opportunity, Chair.
Thank you very much, Epi, for this overview on your experiences with stakeholder consultations in East Africa. And I immediately would like to ask Dr. Etotepe Sokpohoso. She's an assistant professor at University of Abomey-Calavi in Benin, to share with us stakeholder views from West Africa. Please, Etotepe, you have the floor.
Okay, please unmute and share your. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Etotepe Sokpohoso. I'm associate professor at the University of Abomey-Calavi in Benin. I've also contributed to this stakeholder consultation in Benin, West Africa. I've worked with 22 people from universities, both from social and environmental sciences, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Agriculture, international conservation funding organizations, actors of conservation by private and communities, and resource persons with extensive experience in forest management and conservation with communities. According to stakeholders in Benin, the policy brief is an interesting initiative that encompasses most important factors related to the link poverty-forest. In Benin, like in many other countries in Africa, hundreds of thousands of people depend on forests for their livelihood, and the majority of those living close to forests are poor. Several factors can explain how dependence or proximity to forests affect people's propensity to be poor. Among the major socioeconomic factors are conflicts between stakeholders that can increase poverty, unequal land and resource access rights, conflicting governance, land grabbing by multinational and foreigners, lack of communities' access to national and international markets, insufficiency of infrastructure, and modern religions which demonize some natural resources conservation. Most of the time, communities living around forests have extremely limited employment possibilities and are then obliged to depend on forest products and destroy forests. Political factors include the lack of vision by our politics and their ignorance related to forest and conservation issues. Regarding environmental factors, the most important are climate change with the vulnerability associated, the disappearance of bees, a subject that needs more attention nowadays, increasing pollution, particularly agriculture-related pollution, with its impact on health. All these aspects should be tackled by integrated and effective policy, as it has been said. More alternatives should be offered to communities, as it will decrease the pressure on forest resources, improve communities' livelihood, and affect positively all our nations. A forest lives by its roots, and local communities being these roots, they need to keep somehow access to land and resources. They must be heard effectively, efficiently, and sustainably involved in all policies. Therefore, we think it's very important to disseminate widely this policy brief, especially towards all national institutions involved in conservation and poverty reduction, so that it could effectively be taken into account and integrated to national development policies. I can't finish without acknowledging all those who took their time to reply to questions and exchange with us about this policy brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Etotepe, for this overview on stakeholder views from West Africa and especially Benin. And with that, I would like to ask Dr. Felix Kanungwe Kalaba, Associate Professor at the Copperbelt University in Zambia, to share with us stakeholder views from South Africa. Felix, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. These are the views from Southern Africa. The draft expanded policy brief was shared with a number of stakeholders and a number of questions where we wanted to find out if at all, in their view, the policy brief adequately addressed the role of forest in poverty alleviation, as well as looking at the social, economic, environmental, as well as the political context. So a number of stakeholders were approached, and these included government departments at various levels, local and international NGOs, community-based organizations, academia, as well as traditional authorities, including also, as well as development agencies. Now, what is some of the feedback that came from those that were consulted? The starting point is that they appreciated the policy brief and indeed said that this is actually very timely, as it is actually addressing a continental challenge, which is poverty, as well as a continental resource, which is common in a number of countries, which are forests. And this link was very, very important. Some of the views that were highlighted was that in the very industries, one of the challenges was that forests remain underreported, as well as their role in poverty alleviation is not well articulated or reported in national documents. There was also a view that value chains in forests are poorly understood. In cases like Zambia, the only product that seems to be recognized is actually beekeeping. There was also the issue of looking at the role of sustainable forest management in poverty alleviation, which has not been recognized. The other issue was also that as people try to use forest products as a way of sustaining their livelihoods, this is also leading to exploitation of these resources, which at the end of the day is actually continuing the poverty trap. The other views that were also observed was that cultural issues, such as cultural ecosystem services that people get from forests, are not well documented around, they're not well documented both in literature, and it was very impressive to find this articulated in the policy brief. So through this process, once after getting all these views, like it was mentioned earlier, a workshop was held where these views that were highlighted were actually discussed and then incorporated in the document. What are some of the things that you found very, very helpful in this process? One of them is that the various interests of different groups were brought to the fore. It is very interesting to find that different stakeholders have their varying interests, and it is important that documents or policy tools such as this one actually bring into consideration the various views of the various sectors as well as stakeholders, which came out very well in this process. The other thing that was also I found very helpful in this process was the bringing into light some of the issues that may actually be forgotten. I think within, as we went through the process of developing this policy brief, there were some issues that were raised by stakeholders, which later on were then incorporated into this document. So if we do not go through this process, it means that some of the important views may actually be left out in the document. And going through this robust consultative process such as this one is also very important in the sense that it brought about the ownership of the document. So all in all, the policy brief was well received. Not only was it well received, but stakeholders brought out the various issues that were then taken into consideration in improving the document. So the document that therefore we have right now is a document that is informed by the various views of stakeholders. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Felix, for your comprehensive overview of your experiences in the stakeholder consultation. We do have now some time for further questions to all of our local experts, and in case there's still more time, we could also include other questions to the other panelists. I do see already questions to Abby. It's direct. I would like to direct it to Abby because it's about Kenya. Do you have any examples of good guidelines of fair benefit sharing in Kenya or elsewhere, and how have they contributed to alleviating poverty? So I would ask Abby if she's on, if she could respond to this question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that very important question. Actually, benefit sharing came out very, very strongly during the discussions, and it seems that is probably key to is the key to to alleviating poverty in very many communities, especially those surrounding the forests. And yes, we do have examples of that in several parts of Kenya, actually, like the coastal part, and even the western part with the rainforest, and even in the Mau forest. So there are quite a number of those, and how that can actually assist the communities in alleviation of poverty. And what we also noted was that when you come to the large industry, the large corporations who extract maybe forest products from whatever, whether it is timber or non-timber forests or whatever it is, we found that those companies make a lot of money out of those products. But you go to those communities, you find that they are some of the poorest communities. So it's like, that benefit sharing came out very strongly to say that whatever, even if it's large companies, whatever whatever benefits or economic benefits they have from those forests, it should also go down, trickle down to the community. So benefit sharing was very key. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Epi. I do have another question. I would like to direct it both to Tepe and to Felix. How can publications like this policy brief best contribute to the decision-making processes in and across Africa? Who would like to take the floor first?
Okay, thank you. I can.
Yes, Felix, please, if you start. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So I think the first thing is wide dissemination of such findings to policy makers. One of the advantages that we have is that there was a consultative process. So this document has indeed in it views that came from some of the stakeholders. So one of the things that I think is required is there's need for a robust dissemination of this document. I must also mention that over the years, we've not had documents that have looked at forest and poverty in this great detail across the continent. There have been pockets of studies in some countries, but one of the things that we lacked is actually contextualizing and coming up with the state of the knowledge. So I think this document must be distributed widely at the continental level, and then nations can also then start looking at it differently and building on these findings. So I think the key thing is disseminating this very, very widely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tepe, would you like to add your views?
Yeah, I have the same opinion. Like I said, it should be disseminated widely, but not just like sending them to ministry and all this, but take the lead and do some lobbying around it. International organizations need to do some lobbying so that the decision maker should pay more attention to it and try to use it and apply it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting discussion. Yes, there is still a question left to the previous panel. And I think I would like to direct it to Laura. What are the effective strategies to communicate the importance of forest and poverty alleviation to policymakers and the public? So what do you think, Laura, what are the most effective strategies in communication?
So I think it's very important to actually involve the policymakers very early on in the process. If, for example, you are planning a given research project or things like that. So it's not just the final findings that you present, but you actually involve them from the very beginning. So you get their specific inputs on what is actually needed. And then I will say that this whole process has actually really helped a lot for us as researchers in terms of knowing what is actually needed and what is the interest. And then I think my second point is that I think it's very important to communicate it in different formats. And I also think that this policy brief is a very good step also to echo what Felix just said, that this is actually one of the first time where we have this broad overview. So often it can be a little bit tricky, I think, for policymakers to know what to do with a very context-specific knowledge. But policy brief like this, where we try to actually sort of like collect it at a more broad scale, I think that is very helpful to guide.
Thank you very much. Oh, I see there is another question. It's what can the role of youth be in sustainable forest management in Africa, and how can they be engaged in such interventions? And I might ask one of the African experts, maybe Etotepe, do you would like to respond to this question?
Sorry, I didn't hear it well.
Yeah, the question was, what can the role of youth be, young people be in sustainable forest management in Africa, and how can they be engaged in such interventions?
We know that youth are they are not even the future, they are the present. So yeah, they have, it's easy to work with young people because they are it's easy to make them change their mind because they are not, I don't know how I can say it, but it's easy to work with young people, and they are a good way to reach the older one. They are more prone to change things. So I think, yeah, it's important in all policies today. I think young people have a lot of things to do. They have an important place, and they should be involved in all policies and all action in the field. And what is good is they are quite active. There are many youth organizations that could be involved in this. I saw someone posted something about that, and yes, they can help with the lobbying of this policy brief.
Thank you very much. Yes. Yes. Please, Doris. Yes, sure.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we have with the youth is that they do not find forestry very attractive. And one of the things we need to do is to make it attractive to them. currently the major challenges they're facing is unemployment. So if we can show them how they can generate their income from forestry through providing employment opportunities, even building their capacity to develop enterprises on forest-based enterprises that they can generate their livelihoods, I'm sure they will be much more engaged in this. They'll be seeing the value. So we need to communicate this value to them and bring them on board in capacity building so that they can see the value and also give them the space to contribute, because they are very young, as the panelists have said. They're very energetic, so they have a lot of potential to contribute to forestry. And they're also very innovative. In the ICT sector, they are the most active. And if we can find a way to use their innovations in forestry and enterprise for their own livelihoods, I'm sure they will be able to be much better entrenched into forestry activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris. I see that Abby and Felix raised their hands. I start with Abby, but please be brief in your intervention.
Yes, I'll be very brief, Chair. Thank you. During our discussions, we noted that there was a very big disconnect between the youth and the older generation. And the youth are looking at forests for extraction and making money, rather than the sustainability. There's a bit of sustainability that is missing in that disconnect. And that's why we were advocating for knowledge management and to see how can we get that indigenous knowledge from the older people and to get the youth to appreciate the importance of forests and also sustainability. And I think my other two colleagues have filled in the other things that I would have said. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Epi. Felix.
Thank you so much. I think one of the things that we need to do is that the young people must see economic value of forests. If you don't know the economic value or there are no economic benefits, then engaging in these things is taken as a sheer waste of time. So there's need to actually develop value chain in forests, which will actually promote, which will interest young people, because wherever there's money, wherever there's resources, young people will be engaged. They're not going to just be engaged for the sake of just conservation, but I think there's need to make that link. Secondly, we've talked about ICT in agriculture and all these other sectors. The question is that what steps have we moved in looking at ICT in forest management? ICT in forest management, it's not there. So I think these are some of the things that we need to do. If you're going to talk about just conservation, if we're only going to talk about the future, for young people who is unemployed today and lacking basic necessities today, they're not going to be engaged. But I think we need to develop a value chain for forest products. And these value chains alone will promote and interest the young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix. With that, we're coming to close, ladies and gentlemen. The time is over. And well, in summarizing, I have to say, I mean, we know that forests and trees are often overlooked in the context of poverty alleviation. But all the evidence presented in the side event today confirms that these natural capital assets need to take on a more central role in advancing the global poverty reduction and sustainability goals, and that especially in Africa. And however, if you look at that, it is crucial that the policy and management measures that enable forests and trees to alleviate poverty are tailored to each specific context. And that's why we have developed this policy brief, and I sincerely hope that our publication will successfully contribute to raising awareness on this issue and to developing effective poverty alleviation strategies in Africa. Our publication is now available for download at the IUFOR website. You will see the link posted in the chat. Hard copies can be also ordered from IUFOR headquarters. And with that, I wish to express my sincere thanks to all speakers in this event, to all the authors and editors of the publication. And I would also like to sincerely thank our donors, without whom none of the work presented today would have been possible. And last but not least, sincere thanks to each and every one of you for joining this HLPF side event of our youth. Good day, good evening, and good night.